Welcome to the party. I'm Sam Ekstrom of Locked On Sports Minnesota. Ownership drama, the start of the NBA Cup, and Anthony Edwards' three-point volume. Coming up on this morning's Minnesota basketball party.
This is Locked On Sports Minnesota podcast. It's endless Minnesota Timberwolves talk with the diverse voices of your local experts. It's time for the Minnesota basketball party on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up? It's Wolves Talk every Wednesday here on Locked On Sports Minnesota. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. And thank you for commenting during the show. We appreciate that. And to all the subscribers, all the everydayers, we love you. Thank you for checking out Locked On Sports Minnesota. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making us your first watch or listen. For your second one, check out Locked On Wolves with Ben Beacon. Great daily Wolves content. And the audio of this show lives on that feed, the Locked On Wolves podcast feed, wherever you get your podcasts. We've got a lot to get to, which we'll introduce in the opening tip. But first, we are brought to you today by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Let's meet a full panel this morning with our opening tip.
I'm Ron Johnson, former Gophers wide receiver, Hall of Famer, NFL wide receiver, and I have to talk about this. Steph Curry with Clay, right? They had Draymond. Can the Timberwolves find that third person?
I'm Jack Borman, co-host of the Locked On Wolves postcast with my man Luke Inman, and I'm excited to dive into what we learned from three very different Timberwolves games over the last week.
Reggie Wilson, sports director at Care 11, and the NBA schedulers are cruel. But I think what the Wolves showed was encouraging.
I'm Ben Beacon, host of the daily Locked On Wolves podcast, and I'll talk a little bit about what's been most encouraging about the Wolves offense so far this season and why I think there's still room for growth, even though it's been a really strong unit to this point.
And again, I'm Sam Ekstrom. It was a 2-1 week for the Wolves that we're going to review, where I also have Anthony Edwards' three-point volume that I'd like to get your thoughts on. And of course, A-Rod and Lore right now in arbitration against Glen Taylor. Who's going to win and what's at stake? All of that on the Minnesota basketball party. But let's review before we preview. It was a 2-1 week that began with a thrilling win against the Denver Nuggets on Friday. A 10-point comeback in the final 3 minutes. One of those wins that you might think about all year. And if it comes down to some kind of tiebreaker with Denver and you're thinking back to this game and seeding is at stake, that was a really awesome win. Followed that up with a clunker in San Antonio in the back-to-back, and then a really beautiful performance against the Hornets on Monday. So Ron Johnson, kick it off with you. Let's review the week. What'd you learn? What'd you learn from the Wolves in those three games?
Yeah, so to talk about the first one, let's go with that Nuggets game. You look at the rebounds, offensive rebounds. I don't know if Cat would have been the offensive rebounder, but I feel like they have to find a way, even though they won the game. So you can nitpick when they win. They can't get beat on the offensive glass. And then when you look at the way they shot three-pointers, though, it worked. Is that sustainable? But my point was, when you look at the three games, in game number one, Rudy Gobert, 17 points, was your third fiddle to those other two in Julius Randle and Anthony Edwards. In the Spurs, it was Dante DiVincenzo with 14. In the second, the Spurs. And the Hornets, the third game, was 25, which was crazy. Naz Reid actually led it off. But can they find a sustainable guy? Like, they need somebody every night they can count on as that third fiddle. When you look at teams like the Warriors that were sustainable champions, they had Draymond all the time. We knew Steph and Clay and what they would do. They would have a different guy like Andrew Wiggins or somebody step up every once in a while. But Draymond was a staple, whether it was defensively or it was cleaning the glass. I will say 9 blocks from the Timberwolves in that game against the Nuggets as well. That was a big part of it. But they have to find somebody more consistent every single night. And again, I think they're learning. It's new. It's early. By the way, I think a lot of us predicted 2-1. I know some people said 3-0. So they stuck to the 2-1. Not the way we thought the 2-1 would come, but it still came. So it technically could have been 3-0. I see why the 3-0 was a thought, because the Nuggets was a win. Hornets was a win. Spurs should have been a win. But that team's really good as well. So that's just my thought. I want to find a third guy. Give me a third guy that we can count on every night. Again, when it was Karl-Anthony Towns and Anthony Edwards, I think Naz Reid kind of knew exactly where he fit in. With Julius Randle right now, I don't know if everybody knows where they fit in right now.
Yeah, Ron, I think I'm perfect through 2 predict the weeks. I think I've nailed both because I believe I did say Spurs lock.
Good for you.
Just pat myself on the back. You hear that, listeners? I'm patting myself on the back very hard. Jack Borman, what'd you learn this past week?
Yeah, I think, first and foremost with that Denver game, we learned that, the Timberwolves are going to guard Nikola Jokic straight up with Rudy Gobert. And it started off a little rough with how Denver was able to score so easily in that first quarter. But I think that, they all kind of figured it out, and Denver doesn't have enough shooters around Nikola Jokic where the Wolves are kind of able to double him and force them to, throw the ball around to guys like Aaron Gordon. And force Aaron Gordon to try and beat you. And Aaron Gordon played phenomenal.
He almost did.
And he almost did. But again, that's how good the Nuggets are going to have to play around Nikola Jokic just to be right there with the Wolves. So I think you have to feel good about that. But most importantly from that game, I think that we learned that Dante DiVincenzo and Rudy Gobert are developing a really evident and growing chemistry that I think is really important. I think last season, they're really the only 2 guys that had any type of chemistry that you could bank on from night to night in the backcourt with Gobert were Nickeil Alexander-Walker and Mike Conley, obviously, but having another guard that can really find Rudy Gobert inside and utilize him above the rim with lobs or dump offs. We've seen Dante have quite a few dump offs now for Rudy Gobert for dunks. I think that's really important. And then in the San Antonio game, I think we learned that rebounding is just going to be really important for the Timberwolves. I think the leading rebounder in that game had 5 rebounds. They just need to have their big guys rebound a lot better. And I think Anthony Edwards needs to take it upon himself to be more of a rebounder inside. But a good thing from that game, and really all 3 games, I think that stood out to me the most above everything else was that we're really starting to see that offensive unit that is based around Naz and Julius in the front court really start to find their groove offensively. I think they've kind of figured out how to space around one another, how to play 5 out. I think we've seen especially the lineups towards the end of the first quarter where you have Nickeil, Dante, and Julius and Naz. Those lineups have been particularly effective since we last convened here for the party. And I think, if the Wolves can use those lineups to build a little bit more of a lead at the start of the second quarter and the start of the fourth quarter, when they put those lineups out there that are struggling a little bit more right now, I think the more of a buffer they can build for those moments in the game, I think are going to be important. And then hopefully, as you play more games, you can buy your starters a little bit more time to continue to gel and become a little bit more effective than they have been so far this season. But I think, it was 3 very different games. And it'll be interesting to see if that San Antonio performance, is one that you can kind of chalk up to a really tough scheduling spot, or if that's something that's going to continue to bite them here as they play, Chicago, especially, I think will be kind of a good test as a team that shoots a bunch of threes and, can get downhill on you and play in a way that I guess, is similar to San Antonio, and that there'd be a lot of offensive rebounding opportunities.
Yeah, a couple back-to-backs coming up. Reggie Wilson, what did you learn from this past week?
Yeah, I think if you are watching the Wolves, I think you're encouraged. One, because, there's so much that was said about, okay, swapping out Cat for Julius Randle, how are things going to go? Julius Randle looks like a really good fit for this Timberwolves basketball team. And, last game he had 13 points, which, is not going to, just do a whole lot to move you, but he is averaging 21 points, 6 boards, 4 assists a game this season for the Wolves, and he looks incredibly productive on the floor. I know, a lot was made about okay, when he waves off Ant to go ISO bully ball to the rack, how is that going to land? But so far, Ant has sang his praises. He loves playing with him, and so also, it's different, right? When Cat decided that he was going to put his head down and go to the basket, you got some different results than you see from Randall. A lot of times you got a charge, you got some whining about, getting that charge and just kills an offensive possession. More times than not, if Randall gets to the cup, either he makes it, gets a call, or he misses, but you don't see a lot of charges. So that's been pretty encouraging to see just these offensive possessions really not die, kind of like they used to. And also too, like Julius Randle is I don't know, it's a bit surprising, some of his 3-point output, shooting 46% from three, which I ain't too mad at that. You know what I'm saying? Like that's not a terrible percentage from Drew Randall. You see, you wonder how that continues to develop over the season. So I like that. I like that. In terms of the last game, or the last couple wins, I should say, there were times where you're like, oh, okay, yeah, in that win over Denver, it's like, okay, yeah, all right, it's probably over. But just the scrappiness of this team early on is encouraging. If you're a Timberwolves fan, you're like, okay, all right, they can figure things out. And then also too, I think we saw in years past when they play a team that they're clearly better than, like the Hornets, which the graphic that they had on FanDuel Sports Network North, 7-2. Charlotte was in the last 9 against the Wolves. It's just like, what? How does that even make sense? But the Wolves obviously were up for playing Charlotte that night, and they didn't play with their food. I think sometimes in the past you've seen that from the Wolves. They kind of play with their food. In that third quarter, it looked like it might be getting a little interesting, and then they were like, "Nah, that's okay." Encouraging signs. I tweeted out that night, plus 33 when Naz Reid was on the court, plus 33 when Dante DiVincenzo was on the court, plus 22 with Nikhil on the court, which, those 3 guys are going to be critical to the Wolves' success this season. Ant plus 9 when he was on the court, and a pretty modest night from him, 6 of 11 from the field. So I think you see a lot of things that you like. They didn't play with their food. Even got a chance to see some of the reserve guys. Finchie kind of clearing the bench a little bit in the end of that Hornets game. So those are things that are encouraging. Those are things that you like to see. I don't like the scheduling on that back-to-back where you're getting on a plane and having to get to San Antonio after a late tip on a Friday night. Like that just seemed cruel. And I kind of attribute the loss a lot to that as well. Something they're going to have to overcome because the scheduling is what the scheduling is.
Yeah, they got to San Antonio at 4:30 a.m. that day. Finally, Ben Beacon, what'd you learn this past week?
Yeah, I mean, at the risk of oversimplifying things, I talked on Wednesday's Locked On Wolves a lot about the Timberwolves shot selection as an offense and the volume of 3-point shots that they're taking. I mean, there's a lot of in the weeds, like details in each of these 3 games that some of these guys mentioned that we could get into. But like they shot the ball really well from outside the arc and really frequently on Friday and on Monday, and they didn't shoot it well on Saturday against the Spurs. Like obviously there's other stuff that goes into it. And I think travel and lack of legs and at times effort because of that on Saturday is the biggest reason. But this team's shooting lights out from 3. They're almost 40% as a team. They're top 3. I think they're 3rd in the league in 3-point percentage. They're, I think, 2nd in 3-point rate. They're 5th in attempts per game since they play at a slower pace. They're shooting a lot of threes and they're making a lot of threes. Reggie mentioned Julius Randle. And that's just like early last season, the volume of 3-point shots was not there for the Wolves offense. And it rose over the course of the season. And by the end of the year, they were kind of middle of the pack in attempts and first in percentage. If you look at cleaning the glass and take out garbage time and heaves and all that stuff. So they were a great 3-point shooting team. And the craziest thing about it is they don't have Karl Anthony Towns anymore. And if you had asked me 3 weeks ago, hey, who's going to lead, who are the best shooters on the team? Every one of us would have said Mike Conley and Dante DiVincenzo. And outside of Jaden McDaniels, those are the 2 worst 3-point shooters right now on the team. And So on the one side, yeah, Nasri's not going to shoot 49% all season from three. Julius Randle's not going to shoot 46%. His 40% year a few years ago is clearly an outlier. And I don't know that Ant's going to shoot 45%, but Mike Conley and Dante DiVincenzo are not going to shoot 33%. And they're combined taking 12 threes a game and making four of them a game. They're like combined 4 of 12. They're going to shoot that volume all year, and they're not going to shoot that percentage all year. Nas and Julius Randle may not shoot 48, 49% all year, but their volume is still lower than what DiVincenzo and Conley are going to take. So I think we're not even 10% of the way through the schedule. We will be after tomorrow night, but I mean, like, the fact that this team is taking so many threes, making so many threes, and their best 3-point shooters aren't actually shooting the ball that well is super encouraging. And that's something I think we all thought we were getting in Chris Finch's offense that took a little while to materialize. And it's funny that it's happening now without Karl-Anthony Towns and, with the double bigs that are, potentially clogging, things up offensively and spacing issues with Randle and Gobert. And that just hasn't overall been the case to this point. It can be here and there, but to this point in the season, 7 games in, the volume and accuracy of their 3-point shooting to me is a really positive indicator.
I do want to press you guys on the Anthony Edwards 3-point volume a little bit later in the show because I think it's an interesting development. But we got to get to this ownership drama. Arbitration ongoing, A-Rod and Lore versus Taylor. What's at stake? That's next on the Minnesota Basketball Party. This episode is brought to you by Hims. Your sex life is important, but your schedule is busy. You don't have the time to go to a doctor's office to get treated for ED. Through Hims, you can get a personalized ED treatment without stepping foot outside your door. Hims provides access to a range of doctor-trusted ED treatments like chewable hard mints and Viagra and Cialis and their generics for up to 95% cheaper. Process 100% online. No need for uncomfortable doctor visits. Just answer a series of questions on their site, and a medical provider will determine the right treatment option. If prescribed, your medication ships directly to you in discreet packaging right to your door for free. There are hundreds of thousands of trusted subscribers. Hims can help you find the ED option that works for you. Start your free online visit today at hims.com/lockedon. That's HIMS.com/lockedon for your personalized ED treatment options. hims.com/lockedon. The products mentioned are chewable compounded products, which are not approved by or verified for safety or effectiveness by the FDA. Prescriptions require an online consultation with the healthcare provider who will determine if appropriate. Restrictions apply. See website for details and important safety information. Subscription required. Price varies based on product and subscription plan. All right, and I just wanted to let people know about our great lineup here at Locked On Sports Minnesota. It's the Ron Johnson Show on Tuesdays. He hosts the Roundtable on Fridays as well. We've got the Minnesota Football Party Mondays and Thursdays, and we do this here every Wednesday. Minnesota Basketball Party. Again, Locked On Wolves audio feed, Locked On Sports Minnesota YouTube channel. Ownership arbitration underway early this week. This is the moment where we will find out who owns the Minnesota Timberwolves sometime in the next month. It is a 3-person vote, a 3-person panel, and it's probably going to be a 2-to-1 vote that decides Timberwolves ownership pending NBA approval. We'll start with Ben Beacon. He spoke last time, and we'll let him go first this time. What is actually at stake here? Because as people turn the page from the election, now they turn the page to A-Rod and Lore versus Taylor. Who is going to win this big decision? What's at stake, Ben?
Yeah, I mean, I like when we talked about this at some point in the summer, at the time, I thought, Karl-Anthony Towns was one piece of it. I didn't think they were going to trade Towns until next offseason, and I figured that there was a chance they bite the bullet on luxury tax, move other pieces, et cetera, if ownership transferred to Lore and Rodriguez, and maybe that would be like kind of the final nail with trading Cat. Well, that already happened. I think the most obvious one is Tim Connolly and his future. And we talked at some point over the summer when he kicked his opt-out down the road a year so he can opt out this summer. Like, the obvious answer here would be if Glen Taylor retains control, then Connolly, he'll opt out either way to negotiate a new contract or to maybe leave to go somewhere else. And given that it was Lore and Rodriguez that led the charge to bring him to Minnesota, obviously with Glen Taylor's blessing, but reading the tea leaves, it's entirely possible Connolly opts out and gets paid a ton of money to go somewhere else. and run their basketball operations, or he opts out and gets a bigger extension in Minnesota. But it feels like he'd be more likely to leave if Lore and Rodriguez are no longer involved. I think that's the biggest thing. And then there certainly is, anything else luxury tax related. They've obviously made some moves already to try and clean things up and avoid paying some tax, which is to be expected either way. But and Glen Taylor said all the right things recently publicly about like, hey, or at least I shouldn't say he said them publicly. It's been reported that he's willing to pay the tax, et cetera. And obviously he is still the majority owner and they are. So we'll see. But I tend to trust that the Lore and Rodriguez side of things, especially now with some of these other investors they've gotten, Bloomberg, among others, that they would be willing to do that. So I think it's really the Tim Connolly thing and perhaps the vibes around the team. Like, I don't know. They did a really good job last year of tuning it out when this stuff all kind of bubbled up in March, which was a really inopportune time for it to become a really big deal. And Chris Finch, I think his quote was something around the time, something along the lines of, it's not really impacting us at troop level. And I was kind of like, yeah, I mean, they're really not paying attention to this, but it clearly didn't impact them in their run to the conference finals. I don't know what this looks like mid-season, if it would impact the team, the psyche around the team, the mood around the team at all or not. But that would obviously be a danger. I think it really comes down to the Tim Connolly situation more than anything else, at least in the near term, related to what could come out of this arbitration.
Not great for morale either. If Taylor, I think that fans have a favorite. I'm pretty confident saying that the populace wants A-Rod and Lore to win this arbitration. If Taylor wins, the fans are smart. They understand the past, the history, the backhanded nature of the way that Taylor seized back control, and having him sit courtside every single game as the majority owner for the foreseeable future, it feels just a little icky from a fan morale perspective, a marketing perspective. But Ron Johnson, what do you think is at stake with whoever wins this thing?
A lot of money, a lot of control. Honestly, I'm torn. Like, I think the old ways of Glen Taylor, people were saying, like, if it changes, you get so much more. Like KG probably comes back. You get all kinds of, newness to this. You get maybe different free agents want to be around A-Rod. You get maybe a more willingness to spend. There's that. But then there's the other side of, well, maybe Glen Taylor's learning from Marc Lore and A-Rod, and maybe it changes. I don't know. I think doing the same thing over and expecting a different result is kind of weird to me. So I would hope it goes in the way of A-Rod and Lore, because it seemed like it was heading the right direction. It seemed like, that's where everybody wanted it to go. It seemed like the players had more of a connection to those two. I know the age gap is a lot different. But I think what's at stake right now, too, is just how sports can operate. Like, if this does go back, then you're going to have a lot of handshakes or a lot of conversations that owners have promised people or have promised to sell stake in a team and they don't do it. Now it feels like you're opening up the floodgates for people to kind of back out on deals. I think if you created a deal and it's truly the money was there and everything was set to go, you can't try to get out of it just because you want more money. Now you see what the team is worth. Now you see what other teams are selling for, and maybe you want a bigger payout. I think that's more of just rich people's problems, and they just, want more money. And that's when I don't count people's pockets. I'm not a pocket counter. So I stay out of that, but that just seemed like it's a little bit interesting, the timing of it, when you start to see what teams are valued at. And all of a sudden it's like, wait a minute, I might have sold too low. Let me back out and resell it. Cause I still feel like he wants to sell it. I just feel like he's not happy with the number now when he sees the success of the team, because they weren't successful, or quote unquote going to be successful, when he had thought about selling. And then all of a sudden he has this great year and he's like, oh man, this team actually might have a chance to win the championship. So I just think it sets a bad precedent for having a deal on the table and then trying to back out of it.
Yeah, the NBA is never going to approve a tiered payment system again with the 3-year process. I think they just want lump sum. I wonder what happens then with the $500 million that Taylor got from A-Rod and Lore for the 40%. What happens to that money? Does it get to A-Rod and Lore sell to somebody else then, the 40%? Do they get out immediately? If Taylor wins, there's a lot of money that he's gotten from them, and then what do they do with their chunk of the team? But Jack, you're kind of resident cap guy. I always said that the one maybe benefit of Taylor winning is that he had the $500 million in his pocket, and he's old, and he probably might be more willing to pay the luxury tax long term. Well, the Cat deal changed that a little bit for me because now it seems like they are going to try to get under this second apron regardless and cut costs in future years. So now that's not really even on the table for me. So tell me what's at stake here with this arbitration.
Yeah, I think Ron said it really well, and that I think, you can, if Glen Taylor, reassumes, complete majority control moving forward, like, I don't think you can expect that he's going to pay the luxury tax in a significant way consistently moving forward. He's never done it. I don't know why he would start doing it now, especially from a financial standpoint when, the Timberwolves are going to be operating at a pretty substantial loss this season. And sure, the equity value of the franchise is rising, no question about it. But again, I think you're more willing to eat that immediate loss in favor of the equity of the franchise rising, if you're going to be the owner for the next 20 years. And that's just not the case for Glen Taylor. So yeah, I think unquestionably, if you're a fan and you're hoping that the team spends as much money as they can to try to maximize Anthony Edwards, future prime and his ability to drive this team up towards the top of the Western Conference and the top of the NBA, I would certainly be rooting for Alex Rodriguez and Marc Lore. But the other part of this too that John Krasinski reported back in June was that, a huge reason why Michael Bloomberg joined the Timberwolves ownership party is in part because, they wanted more, immediate financial flexibility. And, they want to also be able to fund a new private arena that would be in where the current farmers market is and could open as early as 2031, according to some of the conversations that had been had there. And then the Timberwolves also, or I shouldn't say the Timberwolves, I should say A-Rod and Lore also want to start their own regional sports network. I mean, they both have heavy ties to New York City, where, Yes broadcasts the Yankees and the Nets, and MSG broadcasts the Knicks, Rangers, and Islanders. And those are, both owned in-house. So, I think having that as a replacement to now FanDuel Sports Network as the home of the, Wolves and Lynx for sure, but potentially even the Twins, Wild, and Loons, I think is also something that can't be discounted here, because it does seem like, as you look around the NBA, especially, a lot of these teams now are, completely controlling the broadcasting and distribution of their product. And that's something that has been happening over the last couple of seasons with, Bally kind of going down the tubes. So I think that's also something that can't really be discounted. But for me, it's the four things. It's Connolly, it's the luxury tax, it's the new arena, and it's the regional sports network.
Reggie, what do you got?
I really have not much to add after all that. Honestly, that's it for me. Like, just what Jack just said. Like, I just want to know, like, if things do lean in Taylor's direction, like, what type of progress will the Wolves actually have? And, it is good to think about, the second apron and Tim Connolly, how those things kind of play out if Taylor does kind of win this thing, especially being that, you hear all these lofty things about Bloomberg coming into the mix and, the new network and the new arena and all that. And you're like, man, like, I think that kind of excites the Timberwolves fan base. And we really haven't heard a whole lot about what Taylor's plans are moving forward. So I think that kind of worries the fan base a little bit. They're like, okay, what's the vision here? What's the direction? Are you just standing pat? Or are you trying to slash? What's the plan? Like, we've heard all these things from one side and we really haven't heard much from the other. So I think that's where you kind of caution things and where you're just like, okay, I don't know what to think about it here. And honestly too, like, no idea how these arbitration hearings are going to go. No idea, because I think both sides have in their minds presented legitimate arguments to why, their side should be ruled in favor of. But this whole thing just seems really petty. Like, there was an agreement in place and one side, the Taylor side's like, look, they didn't fulfill those things, so I'm taking it back. And the other side's like, hey, we had a deal here. What's going on? What's the big idea? And I'm interested to see how this thing plays out.
Can KARE 11 get some footage inside the courtroom, Reggie? Is that
it's funny. I saw Doogie's tweet yesterday, and I was just like, oh man, like they're on the ground. They got A-Rod getting out of the car, walking into the building. I'm like, oh shoot, like we need to get a camera over there too.
Yeah, I'm still mad at whoever wrote the contract. Like, how can there be enough gray area that this isn't easily resolvable? Like, have one judge quickly peek at the contract and say, "Oh yeah, 90-day extension. You got it, A-Rod and Lori." What are these obligations that weren't filled, and how are they nullifying the contract? That's what I've yet to hear a good explanation of from Taylor's side.
And Sam, to your point, it's ambiguous, and it kind of sounds like, from my history, I'm from St. Louis, and the Rams ended up like skating a clause in their contract with the city of St. Louis to end up moving to Los Angeles. And it kind of sounds super similar. Like it was like the stadium had to be in the top 3 percentile of stadiums all around the league, or they could leave. And, they found all these different loopholes to be like, oh, okay, we can go. And then, after the fact, they were like, well, St. Louis is a baseball city. The team that we had, the fans really didn't support the Rams, so we're going to leave. And so it seems like, these business deals just aren't necessarily like as sound as maybe you would want them to be, or you would think they would be. And there are loopholes and ways to get out of them. And that's kind of what it sounds like is in play here.
Yeah, or it is ironclad, and Taylor just said, bleep it, I'm just going to do this anyway and take this all the way to court and extend the time frame. But we're going to get into Anthony Edwards' three-point volume. Is it a red flag or is it a good thing? We also predict the week, as we do every week, coming up on the Minnesota Basketball Party. Today's episode presented by Built. Real talk. We've all been there, feeling like we're burning cash with those rent checks. It's frustrating. But here's the deal. Built Rewards has figured out a way to make rent more rewarding. Say goodbye to the money bonfire and hello to a renter's revolution with Built, which is breaking ground as a neighborhood rewards program that hooks you up with points on your rent. Every month, pay your rent and watch the Built points roll in. Use points to jet off on a dream vacation, put your points toward a flight or hotel stay with 500 plus airlines and 700,000 plus hotels and properties. You can also use your points to book fitness studio classes, redeem them towards a future rent payment. They're designed to meet your lifestyle. Earn points by paying rent right now when you go to joinbuilt.com/lockedonnba. That's joinbilt.com/lockedonnba. Make sure to use our URL so they know we sent you. Join built.com/lockedonnba to start earning points with your rent payments today. We're also presented by Game Time, which is by far the best way to get tickets in the Twin Cities. Game Time picks, that curation feature, filters out the fluff, shows you only the most awesome deals on seats. Get into Target Center. And if Glen Taylor's there, you can boo him if you want. You can do that. You've got the right to do that. You can also go to XL Energy Center. You got one game left at Huntington Bank Stadium. Check out all those great prices at Game Time. Toggle on the all-in pricing so there's no hidden fees, panoramic views from your seat, and the lowest price guarantee, where Game Time credits you 100%, 110% of the difference if you find better seats. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. I was hoping for more of a read and response there, like an echo, but that's okay.
Game time.
Game time. There, thank you. If it's delayed, it's better than not at all. Reggie, I'm looking at the Anthony Edwards reference page. 3-point attempts in his career: 7.2, 8.4, 7.3, 6.7, career low last year. And this year, an explosion, 11.4. It's working. 45% shooting, excellent. 27.3 points per game, career high. I think that we can all agree that this has been a positive development through 7 games. There was a moment, though, that concerned me a little bit. Falling in love with it. End of the Nuggets game. 116-115. Wolves have all the momentum. Edwards has the ball in his hands. Edwards settles for a step back 3 over a dude's arm. Missed the shot. Next time down, gets the ball, gets to the cup, scores the go-ahead basket, and the Timberwolves won that game. End of game situations. I still want Edwards getting to the rim. I think it wears out the other team. It gets them in foul trouble. And I think it's his most reliable skill set. And I think he's starting to get more calls too. Where do you stand with Edwards upping the 3-point volume? And it's easy to say that it's a great thing when he shoots 45%. Is that sustainable? Maybe. Ben talked about that earlier. We'll see what Ben says in a minute. But Reggie, where do you stand?
Man, I'm so glad you came to me first on this topic, because this is something that I really have wanted to talk about for a while, because there's so much discourse on X about this, and it is so crazy to me. All right, I will say, just to play one side before I get to the other, I get it. Like, it's so funny. Ant literally said in starting 5, he doesn't really like to dunk because it hurts. And now people are like, see, now he's going and he's shooting more threes instead of going. I want to see him put his head down and go to the rim more. And it's like, okay, fine. I get that. When you put that along with the fact that he says he doesn't like to dunk, now, the conspiracy can be brought. But here's the thing. I was looking at Bomani Jones' tweet the other day, and he was talking about, there have been numbers saying that viewership in the NBA is down. And his point was, well, the NBA is kind of like an unwatchable product right now because everybody just wants to be Steph Curry. Everybody just wants to shoot threes. And, it's not making the game very fun to watch. I think that's insane, because for years, people thought that the game wasn't necessarily fun to watch because, of like, these guys are shooting logo threes these days. And, to me, that's exciting. I don't know. Like, to me, that brings a different level of excitement to the game. But now all of a sudden, the guys shooting more threes is now making it to where people are saying, oh, the game is much more unwatchable than it has been before. Pick a side. And also, it's like with Ant and shooting these threes and having more volume, he's making them. So why are people complaining? They want to see him go more to the rack. I do understand that is a strength of his, but through the early part of this season, he's also showing that a strength is him shooting threes. So let him shoot until, maybe he's 1 for 11 one night, and then, he's in a shooting slump behind 3. Then maybe you can complain a little bit more, but his 3-point shot attempts are not hurting the team, and he actually is making more of them than not. And so get off his back a little bit. Also, it's so early in the season. Just like, let him play out. Like, I just, this whole thing, the discourse behind the whole 3-point shooting thing is insane to me right now.
Ben, you got into this earlier, just from a team perspective with the threes. But specifically on Edwards, it's almost like Edwards looked at the MVP race last year and said, man, if I'm going to keep up with these guys, if I'm going to score like these other candidates, like Shea, like Giannis, I gotta shoot more threes to get that point total up. And that's what he's done, and it's worked so far. But where do you stand on it?
It's funny. I made that exact point previewing the season on Locked On Wolves was, hey, now I wasn't thinking he was going to nearly double his 3-point volume, and we're not going to end up with 11 threes a game for Ant after 80 games. But I made the point, like, if he took 2 less mid-range shots a game and attempted 1 more shot at the rim and 1 more shot outside the arc, he's going to add 1.5 points to his scoring total, and he's going to push 30 points a game. Like, I mean, like, there's no question based on him starting to get more calls. Last year's an 84% free throw shooter. That's a whole other issue that hopefully becomes a non-issue soon if he starts making free throws. Like, I made that point. I didn't think it would be this drastic. My take on it is, to this point, it's worked okay because he's using the three-pointer to set up the drive. It's kind of like, it used to be, we don't hear this as much anymore with color analysts on TV, but them saying, you got to establish the paint before you shoot threes. We don't hear that as much as we did even 5 years ago because it was kind of a get off my lawn sort of a thing. It's like watching football and hearing them say establish the run. Yeah, there's a time and place for it. Sure, I get it. But this is the reverse. Like, we're seeing NFL teams use the pass to set up the run to run against a lighter box. That's what this is it's what Cat did so effectively is he's starting to shoot these threes where guys are running out on him. And then he has the ability to dribble out of it, get into the paint and hopefully get fouled. The next level here is when the defense builds a wall, when the defense rotates properly, or depending on who the opponent is and how they've scouted Ant and how the reverse, how Ant is preparing for opposing defenses. Can he read and react and make the proper pass? If it's a lob to Rudy, which we've seen maybe roughly once a game to this point in the season, it's been great, but there needs to be more of it. Not specifically that, but maybe it's not just Rudy, whoever the big is, right? Or it's, Nas cutting from the corner, or it's, kicking back out to the perimeter to a 3-point shooter, whatever that next read is for Ant. And last year he did it. Like, we talked about this in the offseason. I mean, Ant saw his assist rate go up, his usage rate go up, and his turnover rate go down last year, which is basically, oversimplifying it, but how he jumped from star to superstar last season. That hasn't been the case so far. Sitting here through 7 games, his assist rate is actually the lowest it's been in his career. It's obviously super early, but as long as that the 3-point shot is setting up the drive, and then he's making the right decision more often than not with like, okay, now I'm going to throw the lob because they stepped up, or they're not stepping up, or I can dunk over this guy, or I can get to the rim and get fouled. As long as that next piece is there, this is totally fine. He's not going to shoot 45% this year, but we do have to be open to the possibility that, hey, this dude's 23 and he might've worked on this all summer long. I think he did. And he might just be a 40+% 3-point shooter on 10 attempts per game. Like, he might be, I don't know. I don't know that he's prime James Harden, but like, if that's a thing and he still has the element where he can get to the basket and get fouled and he makes the right choice more often than not, and that's also going to be a work in progress, I don't have a problem with it. As I said earlier in the show, as a team, the volume and percentage being up is obviously a very good thing, as long as there's this other piece. Because the other thing is, he's not shooting as many mid-range jumpers this year either. Like, it's like less than 10% of his shots are between 16 feet and the 3-point line. And last year it was over 22%. So as long as those threes are happening at the expense of mid-range twos, and he can ramp up the free throw rate and the percentage at the line just a little bit, like, we might be talking about a 29, 30 point per game scorer and with decent efficiency. Like, sitting here right now, his effective field goal percentage is up. His 3-point percentage is up. That's all a very good thing, as long as there's an understanding that he's going to have to adjust at times and have some of these other elements to his game still.
Ron Johnson, have you considered upping your 3-point rate at LA Fitness? Have you thought about
I always live by the 3. I live by the 3. I die by the 3. I'm a mid-range guy though, at my age right now. I mean, I can knock down the 3. Everybody knows that, but I'm a mid-range guy. Here's one thing I'll say about it. You live by the 3. That's the old saying. You live by the 3, die by the 3. We questioned the Warriors when Steph Curry came out of nowhere and him and Clay were living by the 3, and everybody was, you can't do that. You can't do that. You can't do that. And it works. So if he's going to remain efficient, if he's going to knock down threes consistently, I'm all for it, because a 3 is more valuable than a 2 if you can knock them down at a high clip. We've seen that happen for the Warriors. There were times where we questioned the amount of threes that Karl-Anthony Towns took. I feel like Julius Randle is less of a wild card when it comes to the 3. He's willing to kind of play and get the good shot off and not just jack up a 3 because he thinks he's hot. I'm all for it though. I truly like, if he, and this is where Anthony Edwards has to mature. If he starts out a night, and we've seen this from Steph Curry, if he starts out a night and it's not going, change it up before it's too late. Don't keep forcing it. Like, if you're 0 for 5, scrap it. Like, because Kobe, I think people used to joke about the Kobe, like, shoot to get hot, shoot to stay hot. Like, if you're not hot, watch Kobe in that 81-point game. He eventually started backing guys down. He drove the lane. He was getting fouled. Like, you got to play the complete game. And I think when you do knock down threes now, you are a threat for the pump fake at the 3, take 3 or 4 dribbles, knock down the mid-range. Like, I think this is going to open up Anthony Edwards' game. Because his father, Michael Jordan, he didn't really have the 3 until later in his career. I think Anthony Edwards finding it earlier is going to be more advantageous for him to keep the floor spread out, because now people that are like compacting the lane, expecting him to just drive, now it's like, well, dang, we got to get shooters, that we got to get somebody out on the shooter. And I'm all for it. But again, like I said, mature. If you're not hitting, pass it, or, drive to the lane in, or pull up and hit the mid-range.
All right, Jack, put the punctuation mark on this.
Yeah, I mean, if you just want to break it down analytically, right? Anthony Edwards is averaging 1.35 points per shot on threes right now. That is absolutely tremendous. He's averaging 1.29 points per shot at the rim. So right now on this pace, I'm not saying Anthony Edwards is going to sustain this pace, shooting 65% at the rim, 45% from 3. And the 3-point shot is a better shot for Anthony Edwards right now than any other type of shot that he's taking. And yes, I think it is fair for people to sound the alarm on the fact that his attempt rate at the rim has fallen, or is, I guess, dropped off more from last year to this year than his mid-range shot attempts. But I think that the mid-range shot attempts, dropping by, 28% this year, feels a lot more sustainable than his rim attempts dropping by like 50%. And the reason for that is because, Chris Finch has said, the Wolves were 3rd in 3-point percentage last year and like 20th in 3-point rate, and they just need to take more threes, and that they have a lot of really good 3-point shooters on their team. And, if they can continue to shoot it at the same clip, they have to take more of them because it'll help out their offense. And, Anthony Edwards is led by example in that regard. And anyone complaining about Anthony Edwards shooting 45% from 3 on 11 attempts per game while it continues to happen is crazy to me. Like, I'm sorry that how he's doing it doesn't necessarily like please you aesthetically. But the reality is like when it got to nut crunching time at the end of that Nuggets game, what did Ant do? He drove right by Michael Porter Jr. and had that little floater that he had that effectively won them the game. Like, Anthony Edwards still wants to get downhill to the rim. It's just in the flow of the game. He knows that, he isn't complaining with refs quite as much because he's not driving as much. And if he's got these open threes, he's going to take them and he's going to keep making them. His 3-point shot his form looks significantly improved from last season. Like, everything about his catch and shoot mechanic looks quicker, smoother, more confident, and that matters for someone like Ant. And at the end of the day, he's averaging 27 points on 61% true shooting, which is incredible for someone that's got a usage rate that Anthony Edwards does. And I think, the thing that we'll want to monitor moving forward is not necessarily like quite as many, like how many threes is he taking? It's more like once that number inevitably drops to maybe 7-8 threes a game, what rises at a faster rate? Is his shooting at the rim rate rising more, or is his mid-range attempt rate rising more? And I think when you look at Ant, right now from 10 to 16 feet, he's averaging 0.4 points per shot. And from the free throw line to the 3-point line, he's averaging 0.8 points per shot, which are both terrible. And I think if you can just eradicate more of those shots, those contested turnaround fadeaway twos where he's trying to shoot it off the backboard and just stick to trying to get to the rim and shoot open catch and shoot threes, I just think that the Timberwolves spacing is going to be better. I think defenses are going to respect his 3-point shot more, which is going to allow him to get downhill and get to the rim more. And it's going to create more spacing for someone like Julius Randle, who's a much more effective player in the mid-range than Anthony Edwards, to be able to take more of those shots and operate more out of the mid-range, which he's been very good at, not only as a scorer so far this year, but also as a playmaker, which is really important. So I love it from Ant. I hope it sustains. I hope that, maybe he's not shooting quite as many threes. Maybe it comes down 1 or 2 and he can get to the rim a little bit more and draw a few more fouls. But yeah, it's really, really hard to nitpick right now.
Come on, Jack.
Intelligent basketball analysis from all of you. I appreciate it. We predict the week every week to end the show. This is the key to back-to-backs. just have them against the Blazers. Wolves have 2 back-to-backs next week, and the back half is against Portland in both cases. So we'll predict Bulls Thursday on the road, Blazers at home day after that, then the Heat at home Sunday, and then the start of the NBA Cup. Who's excited for the NBA Cup at Portland next Tuesday? So 4 games this week. Jack, predict the week.
Yeah, I'm gonna go 3-1. I think they lose Thursday at Chicago. I think just when you look at Kobe White, Zach LaVine, Vucevic, all shooting, more than 40% from 3, all scoring really well. There's going to be a lot of long rebound opportunities. Chicago shooting a ton of threes. I think those are the types of teams that the Wolves have struggled with. I think Charlotte honestly fits that persona. It's just that they don't have many players on their team that are really high quality NBA players. So I think that they'll lose that game, and then I think they'll win the next 3, both against Portland and then against Miami. I think those teams will be a little bit easier for the Wolves to contend with.
Reg.
I agree. 3-1.
All right, Ben.
I'm usually not the most optimistic one here. I'm going to go 4-0. I agree that the Bulls is the game that I would be the most worried about. They lost to Chicago twice last year. Remember, they had that like 20+ point halftime lead, and they ended up losing in overtime. It was like in February. The Bulls
Kobe White went nuts.
Yeah, Kobe White went, and like the Bulls so far this year, what are they, like 3 and I don't know,
3 and 4.
3 and 4. So the only good team they beat was Milwaukee, and I'm calling Milwaukee a good team. And Kobe White went nuts in that game too. And they barely beat Orlando. They barely beat Memphis. So I don't know. That would be the one I would flag as a potential loss because of the reasons Jack mentioned, the long rebounds, those guys just jacking up a ton of shots. So that would be the one I'd worry about the most. But I think they'll go 4-0. I think that they'll be fine against Portland, and they'll at least win 2 out of the 3 against Portland. 3 of 4 games are against Portland there. But yeah, I'll go 4-0.
I think I'm with Jack. I think loss against Chicago, win the other 3, go 3-1 the week, finish the week 7-4. Ron Johnson.
It's hard to win 4 games in a row. And I'm kind of feeling like that. I know the Trailblazers, and I'm not disrespecting Clyde Drexler, but the Trailblazers that should be 2 wins. Even though the Heat have they're 3-3 and the Bulls are 3-4, neither have really looked impressive. And the East as a whole is just like it's the Celtics and it's kind of the rest of the league. Like it's not really a great start right now for the East. You got the Cavs, but the Celtics to me seem like the team, like that's still the team. And then you have the rest of the East, like just kind of hanging on and standing around. I'm going to go 4-0 though. I feel like if this is 4 games, especially those 2 East with the Heat and the Bulls, I'd say if those 2 teams to win, that's the 2 to get. But I feel more like 3-1 just because I feel like it's hard to win 4 games in a row. But I'm gonna go 4-0 and try to be optimistic for the first time and see what happens.
All right. I like it. I like the optimism. We got a couple 3-1s, couple 4-0s. On the Minnesota Basketball Party, we do this every Wednesday. See Ron Johnson on The Ron Johnson Show, Jack Borman on every Wolves postcast, Reggie Wilson, Care 11, Ben Beacon, Locked on Wolves daily podcast. Get our audio on the Locked on Wolves podcast feed. Thanks for watching, listening, commenting, and subscribing. Talk to you next week.